We're going to move on now to communications. And this is something that I think you do very well. And we're going to work through some ideas here and give you a bit of background on and give you some tips and advice on how we've seen communications done well and engaging with the media, engaging with policymakers. But then also there's going to be an opportunity after this for you to demonstrate your fantastic skills in communicating. There's a little exercise where we want you to break up in groups of 2 and work on a message for politicians or a message for decision makers or a message for a journalist about what does it mean to modernize a geospatial reference system. And my one piece of advice is don't mention the words geospatial reference system or geodesy in the message. So start thinking about how you're going to take a very technical concept and make it applicable and understandable to a journalist. And sometimes the way to think about that is imagine you're talking to your brother or your sister or your mum or your grandma. It's like trying to explain to them in a way that they understand. If you think about a decision maker or a journalist, you think, oh, maybe I've got to use a lot of big scientific words. It's like, no, you need to make sure that they understand what is the point. And so that would be the thing that we want you to focus on when we go through this exercise. Now, Teams has got me stuck on hold. We're obviously going through the bandwidth.
The network, the connection.
Sorry?
Dropped.
Your Teams, can I just ask a question? Yeah, thank you. So I was wondering that the recordings of these sessions, I believe they will be available publicly on YouTube. Am I correct? Thank you.
Yes, that's correct. We'll be making them available. So we'll break them up into segments and then it'll be on YouTube and then we'll link it through on our website. So be able to access it from either place. Yep. All right, we're back online. That's good. Okay, so communicating geodesy. You may recall that I presented this picture the other day. This is really to set the scene about the importance and the value of good and clear communication. When you communicate things clearly and effectively, you can make big changes. And this was an example of a big change for us. It was recognition that geodesy underpins so much of what we do in our daily lives. And in a lot of the descriptions and in the meetings that was had amongst member states to get this General Assembly resolution passed, as Peter Thompson said the other day, it wasn't talking about geodesy. It wasn't talking about reference frames. It wasn't talking about technical things. It was talking about the impacts on people's lives and how it could make them better and make also advance our efforts towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So this was a journey that took a long time. It involved a lot of different people. It involved a lot of communication. It involved discussions with groups to explain things in a way that they could understand. And it was through personalized meetings. They call these tailored messages with permanent missions in New York, because each of your countries would have a permanent mission, and they're the ones who are often representing you in New York at the General Assembly. If you want them to support these big initiatives, we need to be able to explain it in a way that they understand. So here's some of the dream team that put this together. On the far left-hand side, we've got Zahir Al-Tamimi, who's heavily involved in the IAG, the International Association of Geodesy, and is the person primarily responsible for the development of the ITRF, the reference frames we've been talking about. And so it was complementing Zahir with some expertise in things like policy and communications. And on the far right-hand side, many of you would know Greg Scott. You also need people who understand how the system works. And Greg, at that point, had been in the UN for a long time. He knew how to get things done within the UN. So you need a team of people that have different skills to try and deliver this type of information. And then you can see on the right-hand side, the Global Geodetic Reference Frame was in the title of the General Assembly resolution, but the pictures and the information that they're sharing, we're talking about disaster risk reduction, it's talking about being able to help understand the impacts of climate change. So the messaging was all about the impacts and the users. We're also doing a lot in talking to industry. So here's another policy brief that we've developed called the hidden risk. And in this, we're primarily talking about the risks to the satellite providers. So the ICG, as you can see in the background there, it's a UN body. It's the International Committee on GNSS. And so all the different GNSS providers get together once a year, and they're talking about things like interoperability. How do we make sure that the Galileo signals can be working very, very well with the GPS signals, and that you can use both data sets and the Beidou and all the others in one receiver? They need to be able to, they need to share a certain amount of information amongst the different GNSS providers if the users are going to take advantage of having multiple constellations of positioning and navigation and timing satellites. But the story that I had to tell them was that I had concerns that these satellite systems weren't robust. And they're not robust, not because of the infrastructure they're putting in space, but because the lack of support they're providing for the infrastructure and the capability on the ground. So I was walking them through some of the weaknesses as we see it with VLBI and SLR and capacity development, and what risks that poses to the operations of satellites, and how accuracy and reliability could degrade over time if they're not supporting this supply chain of information that needs to be fed into the satellites to make them work. Some other use cases and events. This is some information that our colleague from Norway put together, and they do a great job. They've got a dedicated team to do things like engage with the media, and they're presenting information to the media and to decision makers in ways that they can understand. And the advice that you get from the communication specialists, and it's no surprise when you hear it, is that when you're talking to industry about the need for an accurate and reliable geospatial reference system, you need to find stories to tell them about what is the impact of not having it, or what would be the benefit of having a more accurate system in your country. So here's an example from this is a glacier in the Arctic, and it was showing the policymakers and the journalists in reality how this information is collected. And it was a Polar Research Institute that were collecting this information and showing how they collaborate with other people in Svalbard, which is in northern Norway, and how they can collect this information and then explain a story to a decision maker, a policy maker, in terms that they could understand. You can also have events. Again, I think Norway's lucky. They've got some picturesque environments that they can use. It's better to host a meeting out somewhere like there. You might get a few more people to come along than if you offered to host it in a boardroom somewhere in Oslo. So they do a great job, and they make a big effort of taking people out into the field, showing them where these observations are made, and helping them understand what it's like to work out in some of these remote environments and the importance of collecting this data. So this is just an idea. This goes back to what we were saying yesterday, to show people, don't tell them. So take them out into the field, show them what it's like. You've got beautiful countries throughout Africa. I told you I've traveled throughout Africa. You've got amazing landscapes. You've got amazing stories. But take the time to work out how to translate those stories that you have from a technical story to a human-focused story. What are the socio-economic benefits? What are the environmental benefits that are going to come from the work that you do? I do recognize it's hard, particularly with things like Geodesy, because it's so far down that supply chain. There's a number of steps involved. And this is where it's an opportunity to potentially work with other groups who are in that supply chain. So is it you working with the Land Management Authority, working with RCMRD, or working with Afrigis, they're one step closer to those end users. So you've got to work with your community to tell that story. Don't think you can do it on your own. And you'll see that a lot of this comes up in the conversations that you'll probably have to have with your colleagues when you go back and you're looking at the roadmap tasks. they're not questions you can answer on your own. You need a community to do that together. So work through that roadmap, think about these communications messages, and then try and think, could we host an event where we can try and tell this story along with some of our colleagues who are working with the end users? Here's an example of Zuhair standing at the VLBI in front of the VLBI telescopes in New Orleans. So this has been a very strong marketing strategy that the Norwegian government have used to bring people like Zuhair to these remote locations, invite the minister to come out, and then you get people like Zuhair to talk to the minister. Because you'll also find that you probably have seen this, the people within your governments, the ministers or senior leaders in your government, they might take advice from someone else more than they'll take advice from you. If it comes from someone outside the government, it's a little bit more independent, and they might take that information on board. So Alette mentioned yesterday that she was seeking letters of support from a range of different people to try and help advocate for what they're trying to do and try and tell that story. So this is a perfect example of how Norway have done this, and they seat someone like Zuhair next to the minister and get him to explain it. And before you know it, they believe it. They may not have believed it when you told them, but they might believe it when someone else tells them. I'm not exactly sure what goes on in the human brain to make that work. They know you a lot better than they know someone else, but they seem to trust them. I don't know. Don't try and understand it. I'd say just try and do it and see if it works. Here's another example of where you can invite senior leaders to come along to events. So here was an example where for the UN General Assembly work, they invited members from the permanent mission to come and sit on a panel and provide presentations and talk about the benefits of signing on to this General Assembly resolution. So in this photo is a very formal meeting. It's a UN meeting. And again, to some people, to be asked to represent your country and go to the United Nations, they find that very hard to say no to. And if you put them on the stage, they become your biggest champion because they know, particularly about 2 weeks before the event or a week before the event, they realize they want to look smart when they're standing up on stage. They don't just want to go to the event. They actually want to sound intelligent. So they'll ask you for a lot of information, and then they'll believe what you're telling them, and then they'll be saying it. So you're taking that action. It's like who's seen the movie Inception with Leonardo DiCaprio? It's a bit like that. You're getting the information into their head, and then they believe it too. You've got to use different techniques and influence people and get them to be advocating on your behalf. So ideally, in this scenario, you would have your bosses or your ministers talking about this, and you would be the person in the audience listening along with everybody else. When it comes to the media, that's also important as well. You want to, if you develop an example like that where you want to get people into the field, you don't just want the minister there, because the minister is probably more likely to come if the media is also going to be there. And the media need a good story. So you can see how you need to link all these components together. So I'd invite you to start thinking about how the media works. How does the media tell stories? The media tells stories about people. And as I told you, I think this is where I think people from Africa have a real skill. They have a real skill set that you probably don't even appreciate you have, but you are great storytellers. So use that to your advantage. Tell stories about how it's personally affected you, how it affects your community, how improvements in what you do is going to help your community. Find an example where someone currently can't do something because of the situation that they're in, and see if you can develop a story to explain how we could make that person's life better. The stories are out there, but sometimes you need to find them, and you also need to build them over time. And then you can invite the journalists to come along. And over time, you can improve that relationship with the journalists to try and help improve the way that you tell the stories. And also the journalists over time will better understand what geodesy is and what reference frames are and why they're important. But if you start by talking about the technical, you're unlikely to get a journalist to come out into the field at all. When it comes to interviews, this is where it just takes practice. I hate to say it, but I still hate doing things like this. But I think this information here is helpful. Be yourself. You can sometimes be over-prepared for an interview and you think, I have to say it exactly that way, or I have to make sure that I don't leave out that key piece of information. And when you watch the footage back of yourself, you think, oh, I look so wooden. I look so tight. And it's because you're in your own head. You're not being yourself. And so you need to be yourself. That comes across through the camera. You know, when you watch TV, when someone looks stunned, rabbit in the headlights, you're almost thinking, well, you feel sorry for the person, but you're not actually listening to what they're saying because the person isn't telling a story. They're not being themselves. You also got to speak the truth. People can tell when you're maybe overselling something. So just be realistic. You don't need to tell them you're gonna put a lasso around the moon and bring it back down. Just speak the truth. Be prepared. So you got to practice. And importantly, practice in front of the mirror, as it says down the bottom right. That is the hardest thing that you can do, is actually watch yourself in the mirror talking, or record yourself and have that coming back to you. It's scary. It doesn't feel nice, but you've got to practice it. Kill your darlings. That's a weird one. Who knows what that is? Anyone done a communications course and heard that before? Kill your darlings? That's a very odd saying, but it's used in journalism a lot. What it refers to is, just because you think something is important, or you've spent a long time in your career working on something, like let's say it was improving the geoid model in the country, and you've now got location-based uncertainty and it's down to a centimeter. Most people don't care about that. You love it. It's your darling, but most people don't care about it. So don't think just because you think it's important and you love it that everyone else is going to love it. Think about explaining it in a way that is going to matter to them, not what matters to you. I think that's the big things, but practice. And you'll have an opportunity to do this in a few minutes' time. And I'm looking forward to seeing how you go. What makes something newsworthy? We covered a little bit of this already, but if you have a look at those 5 dot points on the side, I think you'd agree that most news articles that you read about, whether we like it or not, they include a combination of these kind of dot points. The first one is where there's a conflict, and it's a bit like a movie. Is someone in a difficult situation and you're trying to figure out how to get them out of that difficult situation? There's got to be something going on there that's causing some tension. Is there a big impact, whether it might be for the economy or for the environment or for land management or for women's land rights? What is going to be the impact of some of this work that you're doing? Proximity, that means, is it close to my home? So I think with this stuff, is it something that affects Africa? Is it something that affects your country? Is it something that affects your region? People are attracted to stories where they can see themselves in the story. So proximity is a very important one. Sensational, I don't think anyone's ever thought about Geodesy being a sensationalized story. It's not like we're talking about Kim Kardashian or Kanye West or something like that. So maybe that's less for us. But if you can think about how you can sensationalize it, that's good, but be careful as well, because if you make that bigger than what it needs to be, or you're overselling it, and then you can look a bit silly at some point in the future if you've gone overboard. And then currency. So how recent is it? If it's old news, you're unlikely to get a journalist to be involved. Or if it's something that's already happened, like you've had an event and you want to get some media coverage about the event, it might be too late. So you want to make sure that the media and the journalists are involved early on, and you're inviting them to come to events which are coming up very, very soon. So think about these kind of criteria about what makes something newsworthy. Put yourself in the shoes of the journalist and work out whether or not you can attract attention for some of the initiatives that you're working on. All right, so now's the fun part. We've got some time. You've got what I'd like to do is maybe spend about 40 minutes, because then I'd like to come back and get your feedback on how you found this exercise. So let's take about the next 40 minutes to work in groups of 2. And I want you to think about an elevator pitch. So for those of you who don't know what an elevator pitch is, you got to imagine that you're at work, you press the elevator button, and then before you know it, the chairman of the board comes and stands next to you. And she says, hello, how are you? What are you working on today? And you don't go, you actually need to have something ready to go. We're going up 3 floors before she gets out onto with her beautiful view of the forest. What are you going to say in those 30 seconds that you've got her in the lift to explain to her what you're doing, why it's important? Now, I can tell all of you are getting sweaty already, right? Because it's scary when you're in that situation. But think about those concepts that I had in there. How could you tell a story that's personalized to her? How could you tell a story that is maybe not sensational, but it might be current and it might be something that's nearby or happening to you? How can you tell a story that's going to have influence on her and explain to her the value of what you're working on around modernizing a national geospatial reference system without saying any of those words? Think about it from her perspective. What would she care about? So you could think about it for, as I said, the chair of the board or the CEO, or you could think about it like you're talking to a journalist. How are you going to explain the impact of this work that you're doing here this week or that you're doing at home? So take some time, break up into groups of 2, and I want you to sort of write a few dot points, like a script that you're going to say, but don't read the script. You're just thinking, right, I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to finish. So I want you to record it, like a 30-second video of what that conversation would look like. And then when we come back, if people want to share it, you can share it on the WhatsApp group. If you don't want to share it, you don't need to. But when we come back, I want to have a chat to you about how did you feel? What was your thought process to put this together? What do you think you would want help with to try and tell that story better?